It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another one. It's no secret that The Last of Us Part 2 saw its fair share of criticism and controversy, with many fans jumping on board to share their frustration about the game. It's also no secret that many fans saw various similarities between The Last of Us franchise, particularly Part 2, and another beloved post-apocalyptic franchise, The Walking Dead. So are these similarities just coincidences? It's time for us to break it down. Is it creative or just stolen? Civic Republic military versus the Fireflies. In both The Walking Dead and The Last of Us, we see a big focus on a large organization searching for a cure, or at the very least, a large organization ruling over a large group of people. In The Walking Dead, the Civic Republic military, or the CRM, is The Walking Dead's representation of this large organization. It's unclear at this point whether this large organization is searching for a cure or whether there is a much different story there, but it's hard not to see the similarities between the CRM and the Fireflies. Much like CRM, the Fireflies in The Last of Us is a large organization ruling over a large group of people. So will the CRM turn out to be much more like the Fireflies when we learn more about them, or will The Walking Dead make the CRM much different than the Fireflies? Only time will tell. But at this point, because the Fireflies in The Last of Us came before The Walking Dead's CRM introduction, it's fair to say that The Walking Dead writers were influenced by the story in The Last of Us, particularly when it comes to the Fireflies. The main protagonist gets injured in a similar fashion and temporarily exits the story. In The Last of Us Part 1, we saw Joel falling onto a rebar and temporarily exiting the story. In The Last of Us, it was time for us to spend more time with Ellie while Joel was healing. On The Walking Dead, Rick was injured by falling onto a rebar, and he temporarily left the story by hopping onto a helicopter and flying his way into The Walking Dead movies. Unlike Joel, it doesn't seem like Rick will ever come back to The Walking Dead's main story, but it's hard to ignore the extremely similar fashion both of these characters were injured, and it's hard to label what The Walking Dead did with Rick Grimes in Season 9 as anything other than a direct replication of Joel's injury in The Last of Us Part 1. A main character beat to death in front of a loved one. Fans of The Walking Dead will never forget Negan killing Abe and Glenn, beating them to death in front of their loved ones with a baseball bat wrapped around with barbed wire. So fans of The Walking Dead who watched The Last of Us Part 2 could not ignore the similarity between Abby beating Joel to death with a golf club with what Negan did on The Walking Dead's Season 7 premiere. Aside from the visual similarity between these two events kick-started a chain of events and built up a story that was identical. A search for revenge turning into forgiveness and mercy. It's extremely difficult to label the writer's decision to have Abby kill Joel in that fashion as anything other than being a direct copy of Negan killing Abe and Glenn. And it makes it even more obvious because The Walking Dead's comic book series did that long before the TV show version did. So if The Last of Us Part 2 was not inspired by The Walking Dead's Season 7 premiere, then it was certainly inspired by The Walking Dead's comic book series, issue 100, written by Robert Kirkman. Threatening to cut off a limb, use of a tourniquet. In the premiere of Season 7 of The Walking Dead, right after the brutal killing of Abe and Glenn, Negan, the antagonist, orders Rick to cut off his own son's arm, Carl, in order to save his family. Now, even though The Last of Us Part 2 did not copy this moment directly, they were inspired by that idea, as they had Abby, the antagonist, ordering her crew to tie Joel's leg to stop him from bleeding. Compared to the other moments that we've looked at, this is far from a copy, but it still is enough of a similarity to be labeled as inspiration. A main character killed and another has to raise their unborn baby alone. On The Walking Dead, Glenn died while Maggie was pregnant with their child, forcing Maggie to have to raise their child alone, a child that never met their father. On The Last of Us Part 2, we saw a similar story where Jesse died while Dina was pregnant, and their baby was born without ever being able to meet his father. The biggest difference here is that Jesse and Dina were separated on The Last of Us, whereas on The Walking Dead, Glenn and Maggie were very much together when Glenn died. Both Glenn and Jesse were one of the only Asian characters in both of these franchises. So at this point, it's hard to imagine that the writers on The Last of Us Part 2 were not inspired by Glenn's story on The Walking Dead. The antagonist bites off one of the hero's fingers off. On The Walking Dead, we had the formidable Governor biting off Merle's fingers off. In The Last of Us Part 2, we had a similar encounter where Abby bites Ellie's fingers off. Now these two moments, as similar as they are extremely small moments, and one that has been done several times in the past on other things. Pursuit for revenge leads to mercy over the main antagonist. So as mentioned before, on The Walking Dead, Glenn and Abe's brutal death pushed Rick to seek revenge and kill Negan, the person responsible for their deaths. However, on The Walking Dead, by the end of the Negan era, we saw Rick's mercy prevailing over his wrath, and Rick forgiving Negan. Similarly, on The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie watching Abby murder Joel pushed her towards this journey to find Abby and get revenge. Much like The Walking Dead, Ellie lets Abby go at the end of the story and does not kill her, and has her mercy prevail over her wrath. Although this type of story is overused and we've seen many instances of it in the past, it's still hard to ignore the similarity, especially when we look at how this journey started. A major time jump at the end of the story. The Walking Dead's comic book series came to an end with a major time jump, where we saw Carl, the main protagonist's son, raising his daughter in a quiet farmhouse. Similarly, The Last of Us Part 2 came to an end with a major time jump, with Ellie and Dina living a peaceful life. One of the major characters loses their eye. On The Walking Dead, we saw Carl lose his eye during the No Way Out story arc, where we saw the community surrounded by a herd of zombies. On The Last of Us, we see a similar moment where Tommy loses his eye after the encounter with Abby and her people. Characters settle in at a farmhouse at the end of the story. On both The Walking Dead and The Last of Us, we have Carl and Ellie and their family living at a farmhouse, which ends the story in both cases. Aside from the similarities in the visual and the similarities in the general story, what the family experiences while they're at the farmhouse is different. It's hard to imagine that the writers on The Last of Us Part 2 were not, in part, inspired by the ending of The Walking Dead's comic book. So these are the similarities between The Walking Dead and The Last of Us. Do you think that these were creative inspirations, or were they just stolen? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, and subscribe to join our community. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.